So like Srtty rolls up this week, and it feels like all of EG is like, "What's this? An identity?" And they just like snatch onto him, and they draft him 3 games of Renekton. They draft him the Quinn into Renekton, and
Yeah.
they're like, "We're a top lane team now, baby," which is surprising to me because I feel like
Respect.
King has been so solid. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Salt Mine. This is Season 2, Episode 5, coming off of week number 4 of the NACL regular season, as we have rounded the mid-season mark, played our first week of the second round robin, and are now looking to get into the back half of the NACL split. My name is Gordo. I'm joined by Slayer and TDS once again this week. Welcome back, guys, as we're in the second round robin of both the LCS and the NACL here. How are we feeling about the midpoint of the season so far?
After getting to this point, it's interesting because we passed the mid-season, but I feel like this week was kind of the refresher week for at least the champion pool wise. The first thing that I really noticed was a lot of new champions popping out with some of the changes we've seen across the Rift. It seems like, champions like Jace, Tristana, Ziggs. You might have maybe heard Jace, maybe thrown out in a couple of games, depending on like the red side top matchup or maybe mid side matchup previous weeks. But now is really dominating the mid lane, taking over with that lethality build. Tristana has been flexed mid and AD carry in multiple games this week. And it's always fun to see which AD carry players, marksman players, can wield the control mages when it comes time for that in the meta. And we saw certainly a lot of ADCs flash how well they can play Ziggs this week to help their teams win. So I'm just a fan of the champion diversity we got this week.
Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
at marksman for sure too. Just because it's like it's been Aphelios Zaya Zeri all season. I guess not Zeri on this patch, but Aphelios Zaya has really been all season long. So it's been fun getting to see AD carries try to diversify, like who goes to Ashe, who goes to Kaisa, who goes to Jinx, who goes to Ezreal. And then
Ezreal
who goes
mid.
to the Ziggs, and it's been more and more Ziggs this last week. So glad to see some of what the boys are able to bring out there.
It's a good addition to the overall pool. Also, I find it funny the fact that because of how it's set up now with the schedule, right? The fact that NACL is always going to be with the same, it's going to be equal to the rest, but LCS is going to have the patch before the NACL. So it feels like technically it should be the lower league that has the newer patch. Instead, it's the LCS that has the newer one for the starters. So changing things seems like a bit funny looking at what can pop up and what cannot in terms of changing the meta. Although I will say I think NACL does get into newer champions quicker than LCS most of the time, and it's showing with some of the picks here and there, especially with the 6 spot lane appearing here, finally appearing in the LCS today as well. So certainly giving a bit more show into that. I like the way that a lot of the matches went, and the fact that even though it's the first matchups we saw at the start of the split, right? The second round rowing, completely different from what we saw in the first week. Like legitimately a complete throwaway from whatever we knew from that first week matchup to this one. A lot of surprises, a lot of teams that were doing great, not that great this week. A lot of upset wins in ways that we didn't expect. I still have no idea about EGC. But now I'm changing my team from, I don't know what they are doing, from Taco to EGC, because legitimately I don't understand them. I fail. I don't have the mental power to understand them. I don't think I'm that smart to get them. So I'll just leave them there.
You
God,
don't
if
have the
TDS
evil
is
or
saying
the
he's not,
genius.
if TDS is saying he's not smart enough, then I think we're all screwed
Yeah.
personally. I'm definitely screwed. I
I'm
don't
not.
know
Look,
how
I'm
to
not
play
gonna act like
anything.
I have the answers on EG. So that's super possible. That might be beyond mortal minds for us for sure. But let's move on to player of the week a little bit. Let's frame the week in that lens and chat about who we think deserves it. I think there's a real clear standout here, but I'm gonna give you guys the chance to say it first and see if I'm correct. Because I think if there's ever been a week where I would guess that we'd have a unanimous pick, I would think it would be this one.
I think I would. I think I would first. Last, I want to hear TDS go
All
first,
right.
but I also think we're all going to agree.
I can go first. Yeah, usually I'm the one of the later the last to say the player, so certainly Sam can start. Also, I thought you were making a joke with Player of the Week and Lens,
No, it's
saying that
not
it was
Lens.
Lens, but
Lens had a good
yeah.
week, but it's not Lens.
No.
I thought it was going to be Lens. So I actually had two candidates, but I'm going to go into like the more obvious one potentially because I did like his week a lot, and to me, he was the main reason they won the game against TLC. So I'm going for Kiel from Wildcard. Not sure if he was the overall that everyone was thinking, but yeah, I feel Kiel played amazingly. Great showcase against Mir, which a lot of people have the consensus that he's the best jungler in the league. Well, Kiel is making an argument to try and take that away from him, and I think he played amazingly well in the series against TLC and in the other series as well. I feel like if Wildcard loses, it's not by virtue of Kill being not there, but more so because they are looking for something to try and make the game go their way, which is a good show of strength in a lot of ways. And Kill performs really, really well overall as a jungler, especially pulling off certain picks. I love the fact that he pretty much is the only one that plays the Belbeth, essentially the only one that I've seen play the Belbeth, and he plays it to such a success that allows for Wildcard to have another depth to their pool in general.
Yeah, that it was a super cool week for Wildcard, especially up against TLC. I think they do run a couple of Keel focused comps.
Yep.
I think the Sejuani mid gets a lot of credit for that TLC win. Just the strat to go for Sedge mid plus carry jungle, and then you go for the Rumble top in both games. You go for the Kaisa bot in both games to like enable
Yep.
the resets for your whatever your jungle of choice is. I wonder if that would keep working against Team Liquid, because they come into game 2 and they like ban the Belveth, and then it turns out Wildcard is willing to play the exact same comp just with Viego instead of Belveth, the other AD carry reset jungler that benefits off of having Sejuani mid. I think
What
there's
a
only
guess,
two of
right?
those. Like, I don't think they're gonna like bust out Master Yi or something if you ban the Viego as well. So I wonder how deep that pool really goes. But I love to see the strat, and that's now something you have to like super respect coming out of Wildcard for the rest of the season. So love when they do that stuff.
I think Keel's a fine pick. I believe he is, or at least coming into the week this week. I'm sure he's still up there considering the week Wildcard had. He was second among like gold at 15 among junglers. I'm a really big fan of how proactive he can be early. And the thing that I see a lot of teams struggle with, I'm sure we might get into it with some of these games we watched this week, is a lot of teams can sort of struggle. I think we've had this conversation before of taking an early game focused comp. You get the early leads, but you have trouble. The snowball melts halfway down the mountain. You know what I mean? Like you run out of snow. There's no more avalanche because you get to the mid game and teams struggle, especially against those, high tier teams like the TLCs, the Fly Cs. These teams that know how to like bog down and waver out a storm when they draft that way as well. A lot of teams struggle in the mid game to push those early game comps. I think Keel has done a really good job at being the sort of catalyst through for a lot of wild cards leads they have early. Kind of Gordo talked about it, and then he really brings them across into that team fighting stage. He does such a good job there too. So I think he's been showing it all season. I think it's the best split of his career. I don't think we would argue that. And I can see the reasoning behind that pick, TDS.
Yeah, no. I want to say I'm happy to see the broadcast start to like really identify him as like an MVP candidate. And also like start to call back to, his history here, because he was on CLG Academy for a bit as Frosty Nomad. And I think he's like, since becoming Keel, he's been a totally different player. I feel like that run on Ginger Turmeric was great, and now since he's joined Wildcard, he's been great as well. So I think he's got a bright future in this league. I think he's still early enough in his career that he has realistic shots at LCS, and he's really I think evolved over this split alone. And absolutely, I agree, this is the best split of his career so far.
Well, and based also on the fact that now Insanity has shown that there's players you can play in LCS that are every bit of chance can come through now finally. So
man, I wish I could still have that belief in my heart, dude, because I was saying the same garbage about Jojo Pune and Danny, and you should be saying it about Jan right now too, and before that it really should have been about like Blabber and Tactical, and Yeah, no, we're
Gordo, we
just.
have to believe we can never go back on
I
our
know.
belief.
Surely at some
Yeah,
point we'll hit
right.
like critical mass. And this whole EG team should really be doing it too, right? With Armeo and Ayla and Unforgiven and. But we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. Surely this will be the
All
year. I say every
ex-NACL
year.
players, by the way.
That's
It's
true.
not.
That's true.
It is. All right, I guess I'll go second. I'm gonna say that.
Yeah.
Let's see if I got the same one as Slayer. My player of the week is Shochi. Like, it's so hard, Shochi, dude. What
Yeah,
a
I mean-
monstrous week for this guy. I just cannot say enough great things. Right? He has like 2 monstrous Tristana games to start things off and take down. Who do they play first? They play Taco.
No.
They took.
Yeah, they just 2-0
Yeah, it was
Taco
that.
off the back of 2 massive Tristana games from Shochi. Then they 2-0 EG. He plays Yone and Zed as the only guy
Zed.
playing that stuff in the league. And then his Azir game is really crucial in their win against Fly as well. He's a great Azir performance there to close out the week. The LeBlanc team kind of got blown out of the water in 10 minutes. We give that one a break. And he got counterpicked by Spyrax, who played a really nice Kaisa, actually. But wow, what an insane week from Shochi, especially coming off of what I thought was his worst week in a long time. Like, he had that garbage Katarina game up against Wildcard just last
Do we
week.
need to bring it up again?
I gotta bring it up again, man. He was just because last week he was playing weird stuff and he was running it. Like
Yeah.
on the Katarina, he played the Garen mid game last week. That was really bad too. But now this week, it's like he's still playing his stuff. He plays the Yone, he plays the Zed, and does really great on them. So he's not dissuaded on that kind of stuff, and he's just popping off. He has such a great run this week. I can't give it to anybody else.
Yeah, so we're just gonna continue this story arc of Slayer looking like he's copying Gordo's notes because I also
I really thought TDS would be in here. TDS,
Yeah.
first of all, for TDS to not pick a mid laner.
It's
Second
weird.
of all,
True.
to not pick Shochi this week, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
true.
crazy.
I'm going to change it, so I'm going to only pick APA mid lane from now on instead, so that it gets clear like that, and then I pick every other player. But really, like, Shoji is a really good call. It's honestly, I didn't pick him particularly because of the teams that they went against. Not because he played bad, but I think that Taco and EGC really are in the best showcase. Like, once again, those are the 2 teams I struggle the most with understanding, so I feel like if this was a week for a great performance from someone like Shochi, it was this one. They had obviously a good team to go against in Fly, and I think he performed amazingly in that series. The Yone game was the one that I liked the most out of all that he played this week. And then the fact that he went against, in my eyes, weaker competition also helped that. But certainly Shochi had a lot of value this week to provide, especially like Gordo was saying, kind of a redemption week. Because last week wasn't the best by any mean. He tried things that didn't work out at all, but even in things that he tried that didn't work out at all, like he was not performing to a decent enough level. So I think this was an important week to try and turn around that narrative, and he did an amazing job at that. So certainly, I feel like for what Fear needed, certainly Shochi stepping up was one of the most clear, important things possible.
Yeah, Shochi. Yeah, I think I'm gonna save because like this is like a 2-parter because I do want to have a general conversation about how I feel around teams like Fear and like AOE now, and I guess Fear is kind of looped in with Shochi, but I was just such a fan of champion diversity working out. These 2 weeks back to back certainly raised a lot of questions about how you feel as Fear, but Gordo put it pretty well. You just have to give it to the guy that's breaking out champions that you couldn't have wagered money on being picked this week in the NACL. And he does that, and he balls out against not the best competition, sure, but you beat who's in front of you, right? And
Yep.
Shochi pummeled who's in front of him this week every time across the mid lane. I think it's also just a great way to highlight the champion diversity because it's a kind of like a champion diversity week. So why don't you pick one of the guys that played some of the most diverse champions across the week. I will give a special shout out so I don't just repeat what we talked about with Shochi. I was a big fan of Dark Wings this week as well on AoE. A big fan of the Ezreal mid game that he played. I love when Ezreal mid gets broken out. So he played that in route to the 2-0 sweep over EG Challengers. So that was really cool from Dark Wings and kind of just makes me scratch my head. I feel like we all have a team that we can't really figure out. I think mine is going to become AoE. Because they've just had a chaotic week. But special shout out to Dark Wings. But Shochi, you're the prospect player of the week here.
Yeah. I will say on the Darkwing subject, I do think he's coming out of this season like a little low-key underrated, right? Like, I think Winnie got a lot of credit for them as a mid-jungle duo last split, and I think Will's getting a lot of credit this split. But I do think that Darkwings has been really, really good. Has a lot of lanes that he can perform really well in, does well out of lane as well. And like he has just such a presence in pick ban as well that I think goes a little bit under discussed. Like he's been on this Tristana mid train for I think a bit longer than the crowd, than the field. He's been playing the Tristana mid for a considerable amount of time. I think he's got more games on it than pretty much anybody in the league. And he just pulled and he's kind of had to do that because he pulls so many mid lane bans. I think more mid lane bans are pulled against AoE than I think pretty much any other team in the league. Like he has not gotten to play a game of Nico. Nearly everybody has gotten to play their game of Nico. Darkwings has not. He has not gotten to play a game of LeBlanc. Nearly everybody has gotten to play a game of LeBlanc, but no, nobody is ever willing to let those through against AoE. And his Azir gets banned a bunch as well. Like this guy draws so many bans in the mid lane, more than I think anybody else really on average. And still is putting up some solid performances. So I do think Darkwings deserves some respect there as well.
I'm gonna next week I'll come back here, and next week I'm gonna track on average how many bans AoE gets drawn towards mid, just so I can pull that. It would take. Yeah. I'm gonna be honest to everybody listening at home. I'm not gonna go back through every single game and pull statistics for every single mid lane ban for every week, because that would be insanity. Not the player. But I will do it for this next coming week, because I actually think that's a really good point to make. And I think looking at the game where he had to play Ezreal, he had, it looks like,
I'm sure Nico and LeBlanc.
He had 3 bans. There was Nico, LeBlanc, and Tristana. So he had 3 bans thrown his way.
Ended up I'm just basing this point off of if you go to his GOL page, if you go to AoE's GOL page, they list what the most common ban against champs are for each team. They have the top 6 overall, and Nico, LeBlanc, and Azir are all in there. So that's what I'm basing it off of.
Yeah. Funny enough, Gordo, really quickly, they EG Challengers first. Well, I guess they didn't first pick Azir because they were on red side, but they are one Azir in that game too. So they are one mid.
Pretty much
to try and deny.
So they're basically banning Azir. Yeah. If you're not willing to be one Azir, then then it gets taken away. And Riom is a big Azir guy too. So
yeah.
Interesting thing also, by the way, in that game, the fact that you're pulling Ezreal post shift nerfs instead of before. It's interesting to me. It's not it's that, but certainly I would have expected that when shift was much more broken than it is in this patch. So it's an interesting pull out. And just touching a little bit on the Darkwings topic as well. Darkwings, I feel like, suffers from something that I also do apply on him, and it's the fact that he has really great jungle prospects by his side.
True.
You mentioned it with Winnie, right? But I think Will as well takes a lot of the spotlight out of Darkwings. I value Will's apport or value on the team much more than Darkwings. Even though I think Darkwings is good and certainly, like you mentioned, underrated to a certain degree, I put the spotlight much more on Will, and I feel like that's what happens to other people as well when thinking about AoE, and that's why it takes a bit away from the value that Darkwings may potentially have in general compared to the rest of mid laners. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic to have, and I feel like you could call it bad luck to a certain degree, because it's Darkwings always that gets in this, but also to a certain degree good luck that you have this sort of jungle pairings that on paper are really good and can help you shine even more.
Yeah, I do think and it kind of, and maybe it's, I don't know that I necessarily classify him as an enabling mid, he does because he is so good on these picks like the Tristana, and he does draw a bunch of LeBlanc bans and stuff.
Yeah, aggressive ones.
I do feel by and large though, he really does enable his junglers to shine through as the flashy player a little bit more. He's a lot like a Soligo or a Spyrax in that way. I feel like those are other mids I kind of classify in that similar category.
At the very least, he hasn't played Sejuani mid yet, so...
Not yet. Yeah, no. That's a Soligo special. Also, the only guy playing multiple games of Lissandra this split, Soligo, is the master of that style. Maybe for better or for worse.
Speaking of Spyrax, That will be the best mid laner that I think Darkwings will face next week. Not trying to jump too far ahead, but if we're talking about AOE and we're talking about Darkwings doing well in general, they're repeating the round robin where their team collapsed right before due to internet issues. So
True.
this will be a real test to see if this is actually a real good AOE squad. I mean, I think they play Fly C, Maryville, and Taco. So on paper, Darkwings should be the better mid laner in my mind in at least 4 of the 6 games. I mean, and if you don't feel that well about Spyrax, you might even put him above Spyrax. Should be good week for Darkwings going forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna be interested
One
to
week
check that
from
out.
now,
He does have a
ju-
feasting opportunity this week. I guess you can really put that nomination to the test this week because I do think he's playing against some lower tier mid laners because he's gonna get to play against Get Back for real this time. And he's gonna get to play against his Onat, who is still pretty new to the league. So
Cannot
we
wait.
get to do the Shochi treatment next week with
yeah, he's gonna basically
Darkwings.
play who Shochi played this week.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
pretty much.
All right. Well, with that said, let's talk about somebody who didn't do that well this week, which is the five guys of Team Liquid. Team Liquid has their worst week. I look back. I was really excited to say that they have not had a week where they had less than 3 wins this year, but that is not true. They had 2 wins in like week 4 of last split. So they had a really rough week last split where they had to play against Cloud9, and then they got 2-0'd by CLG as well. So they've been here before. My narrative is destroyed before I can even get it started. But still, it's a very rough week for them. They go 1-1 against Maryville, 1-1 against FlyQuest, and they get 2-0'd by Wildcard on that Sejuani mid Rumble top carry jungler Kaisabot comp that we talked about at the top of the episode. So how do we feel about this week for TL? I mean, clearly a tough run of competition, right? Like Maryville is a team that I really wanted to call them top half, but with Fear's Rise this week, I think they're a hard 6th. I don't think I can call them top 5, unless you consider them above like Disguised. But FlyQuest and Wildcard are for sure tough opponents as well. So not the most shameful opponents to lose to, but certainly a rough week for TL standards.
What's the funniest part with the week? Just quickly, the thinking about how it started, right? With MU, it's Maryville against TLC. They tie against TLC, and it feels like wow, Maryville tied against TLC. They were able to take a game up. Fast forward, TLC has their worst week, and then Maryville lost against EGC. So it turns out it was just another excitement out of nowhere for Maryville in that first matchup.
Yeah. I really don't want to discredit the job Maryville did. I know we're talking about TLC.
Yeah, no.
But
Just
Maryville,
funny to think about.
yeah, it's hilarious. But they played solid. I mean, how much would you argue minute time they probably played against TL? They probably, if we're averaging a game out to like, I think game 1 went like 32 minutes, and game 2 after that was like maybe a bit shorter. So like, we could average like 60 minutes out, right? I think 45 of those 60 minutes, Maryville was playing out of their mind, and then they slip up. Like I talked about, these teams that slip up moving into mid game. Maryville, if they didn't slip up as bad as they did in that mid game, and TLC also punished them that well, who knows what this entire series would have looked like potentially. But yeah, TLC, I think at least for the Maryville series, they really just got punched in the mouth in game number 2. It's kind of what TDS did a really good job talking about, is that what you can respect about Maryville is that they play their chaotic style constantly, and they won't really waver, and it worked on TLC in the Maryville series. I just feel like TLC might have been due. I think we all believe that they're the most talented team, the one horse race kind of deal, but every team is due for a bad week, and I'm honestly willing to write off their week pretty hard because I didn't really see any major flaring issues that were showing splits prior or weeks prior that finally manifested here. It didn't really feel like that. So I'm really interested to see how week 5 looks for them, because that will really tell if this is something we need to be worried about. But I don't have any alarm bells going off personally.
Yeah, I felt the same way. That like it feels like the losses come down to like really specific individual plays that are like real close. They're real marginal as to whether it's a win or a loss for TL. And then the two picks by wild card, I'm willing to give over to good drafting, right? Like the fact that they come in with, I think, a strat that's really well equipped to beat Team Liquid. And Zamudo says as much in the post-match interview that he's like, yeah, we play what we play based on who our opponents are and what we think their tendencies are. And I think it's pretty clear, right, that like the Sejuani mid, neutralize APA, invade on Mir, don't let him get started idea is like designed to beat Team Liquid. And I think that just works really well, and they weren't really prepared to face it in game one or adapt to it in game two, but I don't know that would work again in the future, at least not exactly the same way. I don't know. Spawn tweets and says that it's like a good wake-up call, and they need to ensure they're playing the game right. I don't know if that's just like the most generic way to respond as a coach to going 0-2 ever, or if he thinks there's like something more specific there. For them to focus on, but it's like at least I as an observer find it hard to like pinpoint like, oh, they're doing this wrong and that's why they're losing now.
Yeah, it's a tough call out in that regard. I would like one thing that did glaringly stood out to me, not as a like horrible or a mistake, right? But the amount of well, no, not because it would be inverse, but talking about specifically the wildcard game, right? Samudo pretty much handled Bradley up there in the top lane. I guess he got 2 games of Rumble, which technically should give him the push, but Bradley couldn't do anything meaningful in that game, in that series against Wildcard. He got completely controlled, lost 1v1s consistently against Samudo, and then even when jungle attention was thrown there, it took them quite a bit to be able to take down Samudo. And I think that amount of pressure that Samudo was able to collect up there in the top lane, whilst taking attention from Mir from the rest of the map, impacted a bit of the game plan from Team Liquid. Obviously, like I agree with what Spawn said in the sense that I think this is a good wake-up call, particularly for Bradley, Mir, and APA. I think for those 3 players particularly, because I felt like Kim Down and Arrow played really well the whole series.
Yeah,
like I didn't find any meaningful thing in their play that I could criticize. I think they were the most consistent and the ones that I give a pass in this particular series. But Mir, APA, and Zamudo particularly did get a bit exposed with the way that they got played. Like the first game, Kill dominated Mir as well. The invade thing was really genius, but it's off of the fact that they got completely controlling lanes. Like APA and Bradley got pushed or neutralized in the lanes. They couldn't follow up on the invade, and then Kill gets a free invade, gets the top side, or I think it was red buff procs from Mir, and Mir is immediately out of the game because now you're behind the Belbeth. Your top lane is losing. Your mid lane cannot push his lead because even though Six is a pushing mid laner, if he gets engaged by Sejuani, he's dead, and that's a reality. So he cannot be as aggressive as possible or try and push a bit more to provide for the jungler. And then you have a bot lane that even though they don't commit many mistakes, they are not going to be the main pushing force when looking for advantages. And I think that that's the smartest part out of how Wildcard play the game, is that they essentially neutralize the 2 open or the 2 main lanes Mir plays with, and they essentially neutralized Mir through that. Not only through the jungler, but through just the lanes as well, not getting any part. So if this is a wake-up call that TL needed so that they stop doing this sort of plays, it's going to be great. Because I do think that it's not only Wildcard either. Like, Wildcard was the best example. But MU also did a great job at making it so that it didn't feel like Bradley and APA had a lot of value. Like, I was going to comment on what Slayer said, because to me, MU did to TL did to MU the same thing that EGC did to MU. Mm-hmm. And it is that they were controlling the game, and then out of nowhere, for no reason at all, EGC did win the game. Won the games against MU, where they should not have won those games at all. Yeah. And then in the games where MU was winning, TLC did win, but I think more so because of mistakes from MU than for huge values of TLC.
Yeah, I mean, I do also want to say, right, that, like, I this has been happening to Bradley all season, man. Like, I don't think it's even, like, a really unique Zamudo case study. Like, honestly, I think like he dies too much in the side lanes all the time. That's been
Yeah.
Zamudo all season as well. Don't get me wrong. But I love the player, but he dies too much in side lanes. Even in these wins over TL, he dies too much in side lanes. Um, but
It was more obvious
yeah,
in the
and I mean,
wildcard
like,
wise. Yeah.
sometimes they cross map for it, sometimes they don't.
Yep.
Sometimes they can't, and the times that he can't probably mean those are bad deaths. And Zamudo should try his best to stop doing them if he wants to like be the best top laner in this league. But like, it feels like you could do this to him a lot, and like it kind of happens. Like it kind of happens in the Maryville series a little bit, if I'm recalling correctly. It kind of happens in both Maryville series a little bit because they dropped games to Maryville twice, right? Um, I think they did. I think they dropped a game to Maryville the first time around too.
I thought
No, I think they won the first one 2-0.
Okay, well maybe it was just a rough game for Bradley that they still ended up winning. Because I'm about, and either way, it's happened with other teams before as well. Like Bradley's had some rough lanes this season.
Bradley, you could say has died to almost every top laner in the
He
league, I think.
has, and it's like I don't know. I think like he avoids a lot of criticism because he's got the two chains. He's a big he's got the two championships, and I think he looked fantastic last year. But like with Gangplank out of the meta, and like it feels like he's kind of leaning on the Kennen as a crutch right now. And with all the new talented top laners in the league, like I've been pretty disappointed with this season out of Bradley.
That's the point I was about to make, is that, play devil's advocate here for a second for Bradley, is this might be the best. Seriously, once again, short sample size. This is the best top lane class we've seen from a while from North America as a region in general.
Yeah.
And we spent some time last week hyping up a lot of these top laners. So,
Yep.
Maybe Bradley's pedestal is just more people have climbed up to it. And it's now on Bradley to which he hasn't done, I would agree, to show that he's like the top dog. I think he's kind of struggled to do that. I think that Kennen is a great thing to point out. I guess if we're going back or circling back on the point of what this week could have showed about TL, that I'm curious to see what teams might capitalize on, is early on, everybody, obviously APA was the focus, and like a bunch of teams tried to just jump on APA, and that's why he broke out like the Nautilus mid, and people tried to like burn him down, solo kill him all the time, but trying to burn him down on these like utility champions, like a TF, trying to chase a TF, trying to burn a Nautilus, you're just leaving openings that Mir took advantage of time and time again. And now, like you talked about with Wildcard, they're not putting more pressure on Mir than I feel like they did on APA. That Sejuani mid isn't necessarily like putting pressure on APA. It's more like saying you can't do anything. It's not like where I'm going to get up in your face. It's just like, if you get in my face, there's nothing you're going to do. It's going to be hard for you to get an advantage because we're pushing all that pressure to Mir. And Mir looks shaky with that pressure. Bradley can't really be relied on to get early leads. He's been struggling in the top lane matchups. So it kind of swings a lot of pressure over to the bot side. And most weeks, I also think Arrow and Kim Down, they didn't really mess up that much. Yeah. But Kim, especially Arrow was succeeding so much because early to mid game, all he had to do was farm, man. He was playing Aphelios. He farmed crazy and hit 3 out in power spikes without any problems. Now that Mir and APA couldn't really carry him through to that point, those item power spikes aren't really hitting when he's stunning these big Moonlight Vigils and all this stuff on Aphelios. The damage isn't there like it should be. And they came up short in some of those fights because they, like we talked about, had close games with close fights. So maybe the recipe, and something we should keep an eye on, everybody watching the NACL should keep an eye on, is the answer to win games over TLC to pressure Mir the most? We'll have to kind of see.
I also want to see how much do they keep on putting, giving APA the champions where he cannot push and leave, or the champions where he cannot make the best reaction possible. Because one thing that I love about APA is him being able to play the Cassiopeia, the Six, the Aurelion Soul. But we know how in competitive these champions can get exploited. Because one thing that almost every jungler almost always, I don't want to say cry because it sounds bad, but like they tear down other players about, is the fact that when you're in the 2v2, you have to move with your jungler or move for your jungler to try and provide for them. Cassiopeia, Six, and Aurelion Soul, particularly in the current meta, are the best at doing those things. And I feel like one of the best examples of that not mattering is the first Fly game where they essentially just dumpstered Fly C and pretty much destroyed them as I don't have enough words to describe it, but they destroyed them. So and it didn't really matter. But in games where in the second game where they were even until a certain point, Aurelion Sol is a champion that pushes waves but really cannot leave as aggressively. And if you outpush him, his value diminishes way too much because he cannot proactively move that heavily. It's not like an Annie where even if you outpush her, if there is a chance for a fight, she outduels you because of the stun value and the T-verse damage. Plus, maybe the jungler's there. Same with the Ahri, same with the Azir. These champions are able to, if not outpush you, outskirmish you in certain situations. Cassiopeia, Ziggs, and Aurelion cannot do this. So if TLC keeps on playing with this idea in mind, how much does that impact Mir? And that's kind of the main thing to worry about. Like Slayer was saying, it's not really about killing APA as much as taking him out of the equation to be able to impact Mir. That's the point where I want to see if teams focus even more. Because this week it happened and it worked to a certain degree.
Definitely agree with that. Well, let's move on to a team that did a little bit better. We talked a little bit about Fear already, but I want to move back to Fear more broadly, just because they have a fantastic 5-1 week. It's not all Srtty all the time. I think they turn around quite well. What has been a shaky season for them so far, I kind of started attention to it earlier. Right, I was kind of ready to say Maryville was top 5, but I think now I can't say that anymore. Right, Fear has way too good of a week for me to be willing to put anybody over them like that. So I don't know. Curious on takes here. I think there's a big shift. I feel like from bot lane especially, like they as well. Like they take Manui to some interesting places. I think he gets to play the Ziggs more than he's gotten to play it, with that kind of coming into the meta a little bit more explicitly. And still just showing a lot. I think showing a lot of different looks so far this week. I think Philip comes alive a bit. I think Fairy looks a lot more like he used to. What are we attributing a lot of the turnaround to beyond just Srtty popping off?
That's an interesting question, Gordo, because I was sitting here about to start a conversation up of if Srtty isn't playing well, does Fear even have a shot against anybody in the league? So I don't. So I mean, I really think a lot of the focus should be around Srtty, and I'm interested to see how teams respond to it. I mean, if you take just to pull a game, obviously they're playing EG Challengers. I'm sure we'll talk about how we feel about that team. I know we already talked about off recording how we feel about EGC potentially the rest of the year, but that game one, there's a 3,000 gold lead at 15 minutes, and it's because Srtty is 3-0-2 on that Yone. He is very far ahead of Ryoma, and he's quite literally the reason that they have such a big lead. They should have had a lead by that point in the game, but he's the reason they had such a big lead. And I worry that what does Fear look like trying to make plays that aren't spearheaded by Srtty across the map? Obviously, we just spent a lot of time talking about how you want to have APA. If we put them on champions that can't really roam and help jungle, what does it look like? What does it look like if Perry doesn't get Srtty playing Yone, who loves to just shove and roam, or Tristana, who loves to shove and roam? If you can bottleneck him onto those mages that can't really move, I'm really scared of what Fear is going to look like. I'm really at this point looking to see who can step up consistently alongside Srtty. And I say consistently alongside Srtty, if we're talking last week, we were talking about Srtty just running it. So you can't even really rely on Srtty every week. Yeah, we haven't even seen. So there's a lot of question marks for Fear, and I feel like that's the point we're going to get to. But I really want to see someone Perry would certainly be nice, but Philip really should be picking up more of the slack in my mind in these games where Srtty's struggling. I mean, he's the veteran guy we brought in. I sat here on the primer and when he's the veteran guy they brought in on a team that maybe exceeded expectations a bit in the last split as the youthful group. And they're putting Philip on Renekton too in some of these games. So it's not like he's just playing, the old Ornn duty or Cho'Gath duty or something like that. He's playing Renekton that is supposed to go into the middle of a team, take all the attention, Gore Drinker, blah, blah, blah. And he isn't necessarily doing that well every week either. So I really feel like right now it's Srtty or bust, and until I see otherwise, that's kind of my stance on Fear.
To add on top of your point, I feel like Fear is a prisoner of their own way in that sense, because they depend on they the way that they played really heavily in the previous split and their biggest success comes through their sole laners being really, really good, their bot lane being consistent, and Perry could be a carry, could be a facilitator, but he was always there. The issue that this team faces right now compared to the previous year is that everything else is the same except top lane. Like Faisal was a carry top. He played to carry the team, to get resources, and you can carry through him because he can also provide that one-two punch that Shochi and him gave so well. Now that Philip is not doing that duty, and I agree with Slayer, he is the one that has to take the duty because we don't expect that off of Minui. Like we didn't before. Why should we now? If unless he showed something new, that really shouldn't have been the expectation. Not saying that he cannot do it, but it really hasn't been shown. And I think that he is really good at succeeding in his role for this team. The issue is that it's Philip, the one that needs to do it, and I think that he's not executing on that. And that's the biggest issue that I find with Fear, that even if they have a week like this from Shochi, you can still be able to control him enough that it doesn't matter, and then you still depend on someone else. And that's where I think they are going to fall short to the better teams. Still think maybe Fury can pull it off, but as of now, I think the best they can do is it's a good old fist fight with Maribel to see who's better.
Yeah, I do think on the Minui point, I would like to see them kind of lean more into this identity of like Minui being like this kind of supportive carry. Like I think against Team Fish Taco, they show a lot of that as well. Like the Ziggs is kind of getting constantly banned against them now. So they can't play quite as much as like they played it last week. But like against Team Fish Taco, they bring out the Ashe and they bring out a Karthus game from Minui as well. And you know, he already has that identity, right? As he draws a Seraphine ban every single game. So I think leaning into that a little bit more and being willing to play more of that kind of mage bot lane stuff that folks have just refused to adopt might be a little bit of an angle in there. But I do agree. I think Philip, you know, even in one of their wins over Taco, Philip goes like 1-8 on the Gragas. He has like a real rough Gragas game this week as well. And it's all Shochi. It's all 17 kills, Shochi, Tristana popping off. So maybe it is really a do or die by Shochi kind of matchup here. Let's
I just feel like really
go ahead.
quickly it's going to show this next week because you're pulling 4 games against DSG and TLC Fear. So
Yeah.
if you want to show it's not Shochi, you're going to do it now.
I do want to see him. I want to see how he does against Young actually, because I remember I think I might have even said as much last week. Like I was so impressed by Young for doing so well against Shochi in their matchup at the back half at the end of the first round robin.
Right.
So like, you know, Shochi comes out against Young. Young does great against him, kind of crushes him for 2 games in a row. I'm like, let's go, Young. There's Young doing real well up against another top mid laner in the league. And then the very next game, Shochi locks in Katarina up again. I'm like, oh no, Shochi, what are you doing, man? And now I have to asterisk Young's performance with that. So I want to see what happens when they meet again with Shochi maybe being a little more on form.
Final game of the week next week, actually, or series of the week.
Oh, really? I know I know who they're playing. I don't know when they're playing. So that's a surprise to me each and every day.
Yeah,
Just last series of the week.
that's going to be a fun one.
You know, good. That'll be on Monday then. That'll be the hardest to watch. So we'll see. All right. Well, we're creeping along here. Let's talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about Srtty. Just because it's his first week back, man. He's a new player to the NACL for this split. Was in the NACL last split. They have a rough week. They go 0-2 to AoE, they go 0-2 to Fear, and then they 2-0 Maryville. I know you already said you can't explain them, TDS, but let's explain at least Srtty a little bit and talk about how he's looked on EGC so far.
So for starters, I already mentioned this with the MU game. They should have lost. It really should have been an 0-6 week. Being honest, like as the biggest Maryville hater / non-supporter / I thought they were going to go 10th. Maryville should have won that game really easily. Those 2 games, maybe not really easily, but they were controlling them really effectively. I don't know how they lost, but it happened. Now going into the performance itself, I think Srtty actually did well. Like The game, particularly Renekton against the Olaf, I think he played well enough. Some fights maybe going a bit haywire, but it's a Renekton against Olaf. Like that is a matchup that it's really weird in and of itself because you winning until you're not, and then you can win again if you played well enough, but then you're losing it. So it's a weird matchup in and of itself. Yeah, it's weird to explain, but it's Olaf Renekton. It's the best I can say about that. And I think he did a good job at getting some soul kills and also trying to provide value for the team. Because I also think that when it came to team fighting, the way that he drew attention in some of those fights was really well done. And then also being able to provide value to the team when they were close together. The rest of the team, I think, performed better as well compared to what we saw before with Soul. And I hope that this does not sound as an attack towards Soul, but it really felt a bit more cohesive to a certain degree in the general way that they were going. Also, Shaden felt more connected as well in that last series. The other games, but in that last series, he was more connected. So I feel like that's the positives that you can take away. And then the negatives is that they are way too. I don't even think of them as being way too chaotic. They are just way too dumb in certain situations. Like they can be doing so good in one particular area, and then out of nowhere, it's like something hits them in the head, and they stop thinking about what to do next.
Yeah.
And I hope they stop doing that because they were having good moments, but the good moments I feel like get a bit uh obliqued. I think it's the word, like opaque. I'm not sure.
Obfuscated?
Yeah, it's
Obfuscated.
something blocked, something that blocks them. Like
Yeah.
they just get blocked by the bad
Blurred.
plays. Like in the first game, the first Baron that Maribel got in the first game, that should have been game over, and it's such a weird sequence of events by them to be giving that Baron up. So I just feel like they correct some of those plays because it's fine to be crazy, to go haywire. Like I think that's Maribel's main strength, and their cult success is being crazy, but doing crazy in a good approach. And I think EGC is the other way around. It's crazy in a bad approach. So I hope that they imitate a bit more of Maribel in that sense.
Yeah. I do think it's super weird that like Srtty rolls up this week and it feels like all of EG is like, what's this? An identity. And they just like snatch onto him. Like, and they draft him 3 games of Renekton. They draft him the Quinn into Renekton. And they're like, we're a top lane team now, baby. Which is surprising to me because I feel like
Respect.
King has been so solid. And I think Smoothie has been fine as well. But I guess that's just kind of what you get when you get Srtty, maybe. I mean, especially after that split on TL first. Maybe that's the only way Srtty can play anymore. But yeah, it definitely feels strange. And I will say, with Soul gone, because I was very critical of Soul throughout the first couple of weeks, I am going to seamlessly transition to hating on Ryoma. He has been awful. Like, what a bad week from Ryoma, man. Like, I'm gonna be honest. I have very few excuses left for this guy. After this week, it was not good. Like, he loses a lot of lanes really fast this week. He gets gapped by Darkwing's Tristana. And I know we praised Darkwings earlier, but still, it's like he like solo throws the second game against AoE on Azir. He like just goes in for a flank that's nowhere near the rest of his team and gets picked and dies, and then the game's over. It's a rough performance from Ryoma. All split long, really, but this week in particular.
Yeah, not to like continue this tangent segue, but shouldn't we obviously we're critical of Soul because obviously how quickly he rose to the point he was at. If we're talking about how far a player has gotten and how short of a leash they should get here because of it, Ryoma honestly should have had a shorter leash.
Yeah.
I'm not. He was the starting mid laner for 100 Thieves at one point, right? In the LCS?
At multiple points.
Multiple points.
Yeah, he
I was
came
gonna say.
up and down for multiple times in his career.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, yeah. The worst part about it, Gordo, is like, he goes for these flank plays. He does it a lot on Azir because I guess he's addicted to Shurima shuffles.
Yeah.
Which is fair. But like it's just like weird positioning to me.
Agree.
He
Yeah.
played a Syndra game, and he's just like, I'm just sitting there like, that is not where you sit in a team fight on Syndra. Like, do you think you're
And
playing?
it's like,
Kennen?
and it's like Syndra's like a crutch champion for him too. It's not like he's
Yeah.
like forced onto it and uncomfortable. Like he's locking Syndra more than anyone else in the league. That's like his pick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, and especially I agree. He deserves a shorter leash, and especially because he's been so dominant at this level before.
Yeah.
That it's that yeah, a kind of regression is very disappointing to me. And I mean, like, and I think regression is almost like the name of the game there, right? Like that. I think that's part of why we were so critical of Soul as well, is because I think he showed such a high ceiling, and we wanted the opposite. But yeah, I mean, I think Ryoma's in that same camp. Like, I think I'm real disappointed with what we've seen from him this split.
To
Which
go back to the Sir, I want to sorry to you. I want to quickly
Oh,
say
go for it.
something about, because I know we came off the Srtty point. I do want to for Srtty. I feel like this week was
Same
growing
team, all
pains.
counts.
Yeah, right. I feel like this week was growing pains with identity, because you guys mentioned, right, like he played 3 Renekton games where it's like, all right, we're drafting him Renekton so that he could be a big team fight player. Didn't necessarily work out, obviously, not too often. It worked out some of those games, like games against Maryville, but then other times, like like midweek, they're playing Fear, and you're drafting him. That's the Quinn those are the Quinn and the Kennen games. So it's like, all right, sorry, that's the Quinn in the Jax games. Sorry,
Other
Quinn and
purple guy,
Jax. Other purple guy, with very limited lore. So that's like you saying, all right, this week we're gonna put you on an island, and you're gonna do your own thing, and we're gonna 4v4, and EG Challengers just blew. They were terrible in the 4v4. Like, they did not do anything well. I mean, Srtty comes out of the Quinn game 6-3-4. He had a goddamn bounty when the Nexus went off. Like, that's how bad the game went. He was playing Quinn pretty well, and we hold Philip pretty high. He had 2 like good games against Philip. I would say good. At least like maybe the Jax was like they went even. But like the goal of Jax is to go even so you can farm up and be fed later game and play split side. And he even then in that game had a decent score line, didn't really participate that much. So I'm just in there like, all right, he succeeds in the side laning, but you both lose because you don't know how to play the 4v4 well, EG Challengers.
Yeah, well, Srtty's used to that at least.
Yeah. And
True.
that's partly back to like the Ryoma point where it's like he can't carry very well in the 4v4. But then they put him in like, all right, we're gonna put you in Renekton. You need to be the star of the team fights, and they look a little bit better, but it's still not great. So I don't know what to make. I think Srtty had a fine start, low bar, but better than the bar.
I think at least at the very least comes in as not the worst top laner in the league, so certainly doing a good job at that. And then it's figuring out what to make out of AGC. Like I don't think this should be a ragtag of players that don't understand what they need to do in certain situations or how they need to play in certain situations. I'm fine if one of them takes the supportive role, or if 2 of them thinks that they should take the supportive role to provide for Srtty and Shaden, because I also think Shaden needs to be much more of the focal point than the other players. Not because I think that he's better, but because I think that he's less of a liability like that. I think Shaden should be played around for babysitting purposes, much more so than for like anything else that a prowess that shines through him. And I think he's a great player, but it feels like if you leave him by himself, most of the times something is going to explode, and it's not going to be the other team. It's going to be your own team. So potentially trying to play around him as much as possible is going to give you a bit more help in that regard. And that's why I also wanted to mention in regards to the King and Smoothie like conversation, because I think King deserves to be the focal point, but I don't think that he has to be the focal point. He cannot be the focal point in this particular team because the other members I don't think can function well enough to allow for King to be the focal point. Whereas I think that he is a good enough player, and he has shown that he's good enough to be the supportive cast and still do a really good job at his role in that regard. I feel like it goes to show why that I think King is a way better player and he's really good for the team, but he cannot be allowed to play carry because the rest of the team will not do that for him. And then Smoothie, I think, has a bit of up and downs in games. Like I love the Bard game, but then engaged champions from him have felt a bit weird coming into this week. Like he played a couple of engaged games. I think he played one rail that really disappointed me really heavily. But then there's some games that his engages do provide value for the team. So if he can be a bit more consistent in how he wants to approach, and if he wants to play more enchanter or range support, I think that he can go for it. Because even if they don't have a lot of support on their side, they can still try and push and win lanes and then provide for Shaden, like I was talking about before. But the bot lane is the thing that I think that they should touch less and be more supportive for the rest of the team. If they, at least in my eyes, if they want to succeed, because it feels like the one that needs the less babysitting.
That's fair. Well, so transitioning off of Evil Geniuses, I did want to wrap things up by talking a little bit about like relegation monitoring. As you know, we got 2 more weeks to go. We're 2/3 of the way through the split now. Time to kind of peek in and see who we think our bottom 2 teams participating in the promotion tournament are going to be. Like Maryville is 11 and 13 and 6th. I mean, there's a lot of games left to play, so it's hard to call anybody safe, and mathematically, I don't think anybody is. I think even in theory, with some wacky results, Liquid could even fall to 9th, 10th if like the back 12 games go completely lopsided.
So there's a lot of games still.
Yeah, there's 12 games left to play, so like there's a lot to be shaken out still in the standings, but it's also 2 weeks to go. So screw it, we're gonna do this segment anyway. And I think I think it's safe to say like it's not going to be any of the top 5 teams. It's probably not going to be Maryville either. Like I'm looking at like AOE at 10 and 14, EGC/Supernova both at 9 and 15, and Team Fish Taco at 8 and 16 as like our real contenders here. And you know, branching off the subject of Evil Geniuses, I guess to start off the discussion, like I'm actually I'm at the point where I am very concerned now that Evil Geniuses is going to be relegated. Because while, you know, technically they're in 8th and are just barely in the safe zone, like as we've described, right? We've described a lot of their issues as like growing pains, as identity related, right? Like these are the kind of excuses we're throwing out when they get 2-0'd by AoE and have such a rough week. They are going to play Supernova and Taco on Saturday and Sunday, and like they've got to win those games. If they don't win, because their back 4 are going to be FlyQuest, Wildcard, Team Liquid, and Disguised.
Yeah.
So they have got to get it together right freaking now, or they're gonna get relegated, man. Like they're on a very short leash. They are gonna play all their back. Their second round robin is very front loaded with weak teams, right? Like they've already played AoE and they screwed that up. And then they're gonna play Supernova and Taco right to kick off this next week. They have got to pull it together, man. Like right now, or this team is getting relegated.
Those 2 first matches that EGC will have are the typical ones that in football would be called the trap matches, right? Because even though there's ties in football as well, those are the ones that you don't consider a tie. You consider them a loss because they just impact you so heavily in the standings, and they take away from your future matchups. Like these are the technically easy matchups. If you tie the easy matchups, that's a loss in the eyes of the regular like consensus, and then you have the toughest opponents later. You're not expected to win even one of them, so it's a tough road for EGC. I still don't understand them, but based on God and absolutely no analytical context at all, I don't know why I think EGC is going to be safe. I feel like they are going to survive by this, and they are going to stay in 8th place and not get eliminated.
I just can't believe they quite literally have to end their last 4 series playing 4-2-1-3.
Playing the top 4 teams. Yeah.
4-2-1-3 is the like literal. Oh,
There's
God.
arguments to say that can be good though. Like depending on how the matchups go, right? If let's say there's nothing to play for in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, like let's say those 3 places are already stuck and they cannot get moved out of that spot.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like they don't play for anything realistic or technically. So you could argue that EGC has to go against an opponent that doesn't want to show struts, technically, doesn't want to give their hardest, and doesn't need to win at all because it doesn't impact their standing. That could be a reality that we see from EGC as well.
In a vacuum, I'd agree with that. The only thing is there's so much parity in the league, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody's within like 1 or 2 games of the next spot. So I think it's unlikely that those. Well, I mean, it's super unlikely that those scenarios present themselves with like 6 games left to play, and it's like relatively unlikely that those scenarios even present themselves with like 4 games left to play or 2 games left to play. So it's gonna be tough.
But with 12,
Yeah. I feel like that scenario is possible only if they played TLC Monday week 6. I think that's the only way. That
They do
might
not. They
go
play
up.
disguised
They
Monday
play
week 6.
Yeah, they do. Because
well, but
that's the only
TLC
team.
also could be because they are. It's Sunday, so technically with just 1 match left or 2 matches left to go, TLC
Yeah.
could be secured for first place with 4 wins.
Potentially. They do play
Potentially.
TLC Sunday. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because they're the only team that's like a boat, like kind of a boat race ahead. I mean, I guess not.
And
wild
even
card
then,
on-
they've
on
like
them.
they've
wins.
thrown away a lot of their leeway this week,
Yeah.
right? Like I mean,
Yeah.
now they're within 2 games of wild card now.
Yeah, they are. It's kind of crazy though to think that if TLC wins their first game of this week, they are guaranteed to be 500. because they'd be 18-7 with 11 games left. So you guarantee an 18-18 spot. That's crazy.
Yeah, they're very close
Yeah.
to locking playoffs, but they technically have not done it yet.
They could have done it already, yeah, but they messed up.
Yeah.
But they are still doing a really good job.
They are. So I guess if I'm going to say that I think EGC's at risk, I guess I should say who I think can bail themselves out. And I think Team Fish Taco actually, despite being the current last place team, I think they have like a solid shot of bailing themselves out here as well, right? Because they get
agree.
to play EG, AoE, and MU in their back 6. They have all of those still left in their pockets, so they only have to play 3 top half teams. And they have a strong history of taking random games off of top half teams. So, like, if they can pull it together and, like, actually show up against EG and AoE and MU, I think they can dig themselves out of here. I think they have actually a legitimate shot to stay in the league and then push down EG. It would probably be EG and Supernova who end up pushed down.
Yeah.
I would
I
say
guess.
particularly. Oh, go on, Slayer.
I was just gonna quickly do a 180 from how I felt about AoE at the beginning of the year, putting them 9th. They are very much still available to fall to relegation, depending on especially how some of those games Gordo just said. I feel pretty comfortable that AoE's still up here. So I'll make that claim now. I don't think they'll be in relegation. I would assume, I guess I'll go baseline and say that I think it will be Supernova and Team Fish Taco, but I'm here for chaos, so EG Challengers being there would be pretty crazy. I'm just kind of victory lapping. I think TDS saw me like fist pump. I victory lapped the fact that we're here and we're not putting Maryville in that conversation. So
Yeah.
well,
Wait
I
for
mean,
me.
oh, okay. So maybe TDS will throw him in there, but Gordo at least was like, maybe we'll talk about Maryville here, and I was like,
So
yes.
here's the thing that I want to bring up with Maryville. We're talking about how EGC has 4 matchups against the top 4. Maryville also has 4 matchups against the top 4. Yeah, or against they have DSG, Wildcard, Fly C, and Fear. So not top 4, but 4 teams above them in the standings right now.
They do.
As in the last 2 weeks. And the most important point I wanted to bring as well with the remaining matchups, it's with Taco. They have 3 direct confrontations. So it's not only the fact that you can get yourself out if you win against them, you also put the other team down with that victory. Again, in football, this is what we call taking 6 points against the opponent. It's you get the 3 from the victory and take the 3 away from them. And if Taco are able to do it, I can see them getting out of it. And Maryville as well. Like, looking back at Maryville's week, it was 2 ties and then 0-2 against one of the worst teams in the league in EGC. I won't call it a downfall just yet, but as someone that put them 10th and want to be seen as right all along, I want them to lose this last week. I'm going to be rooting against them just this tiny bit, but I think it's possible. Like, there's no easy matchups here, and even AoE has been growing in the last few days. So if they are going to fight this last matchup against AOE, I think that could be the turning point depending on how it goes. If AOE wins 2-0, I think Maryville gets relegated. I'll call it. I'll call it right there. If AOE gets to 2-0's Maryville gets relegated.
I will respond to this slander in the most social media way ever. I challenge TDS to a boxing match for Maryville. That's how these kids do it on TikTok, right? They just box each other or whatever when they're
I don't
fighting
think
each
it's.
other.
I don't think that's a fair call. Which weight class are you in? Because I'm like, I'm like,
There's no
I think
way
it's
we're in the same weight
featherweight.
class.
Yeah, I'm like featherweight.
There's no way we're in the same weight class. No way. Yeah,
It would be a massacre, and I don't think it's fair.
I don't know. You might be quicker than me. I'm like not fast, quick human being. Away from that tangent, I want to point out, talking about the takeaway 6 points thing TDS brought up. The more, I guess, the more American sports term is control your own destiny is the one people throw around.
Yeah.
Around like American football and NBA. Supernova has the least of that. All their matches, the only team they'll play that we're considering teams in the relegation zone is AOE, and that's not until week 6, day 2.
Well, they'll play EGC to start off this week.
Oh yeah,
which I think is actually that's like the most control your own destiny matchup I think of definitely of the week. I think that's like a huge one actually. Is like EGC is gonna play Supernova to kick off the week on Saturday, and it's like if you lose that match, it's like I think you are destined for relegation. I mean that would be my call. Is the loser of EGC Supernova is like you are just boned, man. If you get 2-0'd, if they split, then there's still a lot of open ground there. But if one of them 2-0's the other, the one getting 2-0'd, you're done. You're out of here. You're dead to me.
It's actually hilarious that EGC and Supernova also have such a similar calendar of heavyweight after heavyweight after their first matchup. Like Supernova and EGC finished their one. Well, EGC has Taco, but Supernova has Fear. Then after that has TLC, then DSG, then AOE, which technically salvageable, but AOE could be 5th at that point if they win all their matches, and then they close it with FlyC. What the hell is this calendar where Taco, EGC, and Maryville are all phasing against such tough competition to end their split?
That's crazy. I'm curious which team is more aware of what Gordo pointed out, because it's day 1, week 5. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like neither of them go into that matchup thinking, wow, this could mean a lot for relegation. I think they both will know, but I'm curious which team shows more that they're like more desperate isn't the right word, but like more in the realm of what this series means. And I'm really interested to see, and I would assume they will, because the Challengers League broadcast team is very talented and they do a pretty good job of storylines. I hope that they sell that. Whichever broadcast that ends up on, I hope they open whoever it is and they're just like, hey guys, if you want a little bit of relegation fun a couple days or a week early, this might be the match. So I'll be watching for that for sure.
For sure. All right. Well, something to get excited about, something to watch for next season. That's about all our time. So been a fun episode. Lots to talk about. Looking forward to coming back next season, next week. Next week, next season, whatever we're back again. We'll probably be able to have a way more in-depth version of this conversation next week, because then there will be only 6 games left to play, and we'll know how this EGC Supernova match went. So we'll be super excited to take a look at as we start to look at how the playoff picture is looking to develop and how the relegation picture is looking to develop. So we'll see you all there. But until then, thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.